Good morning, and welcome to your morning cereal. Okay, good morning, and welcome to Tuesday. Now, yesterday I promised you that I would tell you what the origin of how the month of March got its name. Well, March comes from Martius, which is the first month of the Roman calendar, and it's named after the Roman god of war. And as spring came upon the earth, it meant that war could again be waged with the nicer weather. So Martius, or March, it marked the beginning of the season of warfare. I told you it wasn't a feel-good story, but it's still interesting. Today is also Brain Injury Awareness Day, National Backcountry Ski Day, which I like that one, and World Obesity Day. Okay, let's march into today's episode with today's quotes, one fun nostalgic quote, and then a second quote to tease our book review later in the episode. Hopefully, one of these quotes will speak to you and kickstart your day in a positive direction. The first quote was from funny man, actor John Candy, who said, quote, "As long as you can savor the humorous aspect of misery and misfortune, you can overcome anything," end quote. And not every day is going to go our way. If we can find our way through it, though, even better, finding humor in it, then at least we know the sun will come up tomorrow. And today's teaser quote for the book review is, quote, "Learned from experience the enormous chemical value of sympathy in neutralizing the acid of hard feelings," end quote. And as usual, we'll unpack that here in just a few minutes during the book review segment. But first, let's jump into our usual dose of fun and historic facts from this day in history. Today's news, facts, and birthdays are from March 4th. Starting back in 1789, that's when the U.S. Constitution went into effect as the governing law of the United States. Then in 1837, Chicago was incorporated as a city with a population of 4,200. Then in 1924, the song Happy Birthday, it was published by Clayton Sonny. Then skipping up to 1952, on this date, Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis were married. And in 1974, on this date, People magazine was launched. Then in 1983, on this date, Harrison Ford married screenwriter Melissa Matheson. They actually divorced in 2004. And then you might remember on this date in 1990, the college basketball player Hank Gathers, this is the day he collapsed on the basketball court. And then in 1994, John Candy, he passed away of a heart attack at the age of 43. Well, let's move on to birthdays and celebrate those who are still with us. Happy birthday if today is your birthday. You share a birthday with actress Catherine O'Hara. She's 71 today. And Jason Newsted, he's the bass player for Metallica. He's 62 today. And the number one movie on this date back in 1991 was The Silence of the Lambs. And you might remember that we featured the follow-up movie Hannibal around Valentine's Day. But the original movie, Silence of the Lambs, it was a huge hit, and it was only the third movie to win all the big 5 Oscars: Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. It was actually the last movie to do that as well. The other 2 movies were It Happened One Night back in 1935 and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest back in 1976. There's a ton of neat facts about this movie, but the one I'll just mention here is the popular belief and the popular quote that Dr. Lecter says, where he says, "Hello, Clarice," when actually he never said that in the movie. He actually said, "Good evening, Clarice." Either way, it's still creepy. Well, the number one song on this date back in 1992 was "To Be With You" by Mr. Big. And I'm curious how many people remember this song. It definitely takes me back to junior high or high school crushes, but I believe it was also used in the TV show Melrose Place or something like that. So it had its moments, but it was inspired by a girl that only wanted to be friends with the writer, who obviously wanted more. He wanted to be with her. The song was at number 1 for about 3 weeks, and it was the band's only number 1 hit. Well, let's move on to some personal growth today in the book review segment of Morning Cereal. This is where we take a few moments to reflect on lessons learned from the current book we're reading. And currently, we're reading through Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's a timeless book that is consistently on all the must-read lists, and it's packed with rock-solid advice and actions for us all to use and build healthy foundational concepts to live by. And on Friday, we began Chapter 9 of Part 3 with that chapter entitled What Everybody Wants. And Carnegie believes that the vast majority of people out there are just thirsting for sympathy and that we should give it to them. Carnegie also gave us a magic phrase, if you remember, that will stop people in their tracks. It'll stop arguments and it'll calm them down. And this is that magic phrase. Quote, "I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do." End quote. And Carnegie says this statement is true because if we were truly the other person, then we'd have had their experiences. We'd be in their environment. We'd have their temperament, their perspective. And you would truly make the same decision or have the same feeling as them because you'd be them and not you. We'll finish Chapter 9 today, and Carnegie continues with another tale, this time about President Taft. And Taft had given an amusing account of an example of how he, quote, learned from experience the enormous chemical value of sympathy in neutralizing the acid of hard feelings, end quote. And as the story goes, a rather aggressive mother, we'll say, was attempting to get her son appointed to a position in President Taft's administration. And her husband had some political influence, which allowed the mother to gain the recommendations of several senators and congressmen on behalf of her son. And the mother attended these meetings just to ensure that they spoke with the correct amount of emphasis. Well, the position was one that required some technical expertise, which her son did not have. And based on the recommendation of the head of an agency, Taft recommended somebody else for the position, someone that was actually more qualified. And as you may have guessed, the mother of the applicant who did not get the job, well, she wrote Taft a blistering letter detailing how ungrateful Taft was after all of her hard work, and he could have made her a happy mother by just the wave of his hand. Taft wrote back a letter, meeting her severity with his own. But he was disciplined and he did not mail that letter, and 2 days later, when he had cooled down, he wrote a polite letter, as politely as he could, to the mom. And it said that he understood what a disappointment it must have been, but her son was not qualified for the position and that he had hoped the best for him in his future. And was that enough for the mom? Nope. With the confirmation of the other applicant slightly delayed, Taft received yet another letter on behalf of the son that was passed over. And this time, supposedly from the father. And this is where the humorous part comes in, because although this time the letter was supposedly from the father, and Taft makes the point rather humorously here that it was written in the same handwriting as all the other letters from the mother. But this time, the letter stated that because of her son's not being picked for the position, that the mother had developed cancer of the stomach. And wouldn't Taft just restore her to health by withdrawing the confirmation of the other person and choosing her son instead? Over the top, right? Taft, now more resolute, wrote another nice letter back to the, quote, husband, saying that he hoped the diagnosis of his wife was inaccurate and that he sympathized with her because Taft's wife too struggled with a serious illness. And finally, that it was impossible to withdraw the other man's confirmation. Well, 2 days later, both the husband and the wife attended a musical at the White House, and they were the first two to greet Mrs. Taft and President Taft, apparently with the mother making a miraculous recovery from her deathbed. The point to this story for Carnegie is to show the sympathy that Taft showed to the mother, and Carnegie gives several other accounts of sympathy helping win over the day. In one story, an escalator repairman, he was sympathizing with the store owner that 8 hours of downtime was not ideal. But if it wasn't fixed, it could be 2 days of downtime. And in another example of a piano teacher saying how pretty a girl's nails were and acknowledging the sacrifice it would be to trim them to play the piano. Carnegie quotes Dr. Arthur Gates here, who said, quote, "Sympathy the human species universally craves," end quote. And he goes on to say that we crave it when we're children, and we still crave it and we want it as adults. That's why we tell all these stories about our accidents or our frustrations to other people. It's almost a form of self-pity that we all participate in. And Carnegie says, quote, "If you want to win people over to your way of thinking, put in practice his principle number 9, which is be sympathetic with the other person's ideas and desires," end quote. Well, we're really making our way through the book, and we only have 3 more chapters in part 3, which is entitled How to Win People to Your Way of Thinking. I hope the book review has been proving helpful for you in your everyday lives. I know it's been helpful for me. And tomorrow, we're going to continue on, and we're going to start chapter 10 of part 3 with that chapter entitled An Appeal That Everybody Likes. So be sure to join us for that. And as far as today is concerned, make the most of it. Not every day is going to be easy. And when it's not, let's try to learn from it. Find the humor in it if you can, as John Candy once said. And as I always say, just keep on putting one foot in front of the other. Stay positive, and the sun will come up tomorrow. Okay. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again tomorrow, and have a fantastic day. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Morning Serial podcast on the One Life Live It channel. You can find more episodes and videos by visiting our YouTube channel and the website at Sean Inglis and at SeanInglis.com, where you can also follow our other podcasts, the Mr. and Mrs. Inglis podcast and the Life Happens podcast. In these other podcasts, we'll dive deeper into everyday issues, self-improvement and well-being, business and finance, and we welcome special guests too. So join us. It'll be a good time, I promise. Thanks again for listening. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you tomorrow.